Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé. Let's check it out.
Ponga de tu parte. ¿Te entiende?
Primero, yo necesito un apology.
¿A qué?
Lo siento.
Yeah, she definitely is owed several apologies, and she should apologize for a lot of things as well. But one thing at a time, so let's see if Yohan can.
¿Tú dices lo siento?
¿Por qué? ¿Qué yo hace?
Right, so his response in being asked to apologize, and I think he might be up for that if he didn't have the thorn in his side, the resentment that she has never apologized or not enough. But there's a possibility she's literally never apologized to him, especially for the big things, because according to the edit anyway, she doesn't recognize any of those things were transgressions. She feels completely happy with things that have happened thus far in terms of her behavior. So, yeah, he resents that, and I get that. But if I were a birdie on his shoulder, well, what would I tell him? Because I was about to say, well, apologize first, and then, she'll reciprocate. But it's not guaranteed, right? At the very least, I would say, yeah, you should apologize, even if you don't want to be with her or you're never going to get an apology back. It's just the moral thing to do. You'll feel better about yourself, even if this breaks up, if you do. Because it kind of looks like they're on the verge of breaking up, doesn't it? To me, anyway. So I would say, apologize, the high road. And then you can viably ask, you'd be justified in saying, I would like an apology for something as well. And she'd say, okay, what? And he'd say, well, da-da-da. And then if she apologizes, then you have something to go off of in terms of what the relationship will look like. You will apologize and she won't. But if she does apologize, then maybe it's, the rebuilding. So, but I get it. I'm pretty sure this is all data in the column that is supporting my hypothesis that he did love her enough and married her. And there's a big part of him that wanted to get out of DR and wanted to be in the United States, not only for himself, but also for his family. They don't often talk about this because I think the show doesn't want to highlight the injustices that a lot of people suffer from. They want to make it more about the romance, I suppose. But for some of these people, like with Rose when she was in the Philippines, these things are life and death. Or at the very least, the difference between living a life in safety and protected from harm and exploitation and from disease. And, because in lots of communities in the world, the drinking water supply isn't sufficient and isn't clean, and people are getting sick all the time. There's this notion that Americans often have, it's just like, oh, well, in other parts of the world, because when Americans travel, they'll drink the water and they'll get sick. And there's this notion that it's because Americans aren't, their stomach isn't tough enough. And if you actually are from that area, your stomach is tough enough. And there's, obviously I'm not a physician, so there's some science that supports that, but there's a lot of science that refutes that people around the world, regardless of being acclimated to maybe some things that are in the water, they get sick as well and die because of what they're infected. I don't know about the water in DR, of course. Anyway, so I'm thinking that he wanted to go to the States not only for himself, but also for his very large family that seems to maybe would benefit from some money being sent home. And then when Danielle came down the first time, the way she treated him, it really, really hurt. And he wanted her to apologize, would kind of bid for it, but not really. And he's still holding on to that. So so now he's like, yeah, I was wrong. And then she's like, I want you to apologize. It causes that resentment and that pain and that trauma to, I don't know if trauma is the right word, but that pain to come forward and say, but you've never apologized to me, ever.
Yo necesito un apology.
¿A qué?
Lo siento.
¿Tú dices lo siento?
¿Por qué? ¿Qué yo hace?
¿Qué tú haces?
Sí.
Tú dices, mi amigo está aquí un día antes de mi cumpleaños. Yo quiero salir con mi amigo, lo quiero ver.
Okay, so he's specifically talking about that. And yeah, I mean, I think Danielle could say, well, in her head, she would say, well, it's not really a transgression that I was meeting up with a former partner of mine that I have no romantic or sexual interest we don't have for each other. It's over. We're just friends now. And Yohan shouldn't be threatened by that. That's the way I'd like it to be. Now, you would think that someone in Danielle's position would understand that a lot, if not most people, would have a problem with that, even if they are secure in their relationship, right? It doesn't mean that that's right, but you don't just trounce on other people's mores, if you will. But anyway, so yeah, in this moment, she'd be like, well, it's not really a transgression that I introduced you to my friend who used to be a partner in the past, because there's not really a threat there. And I should recognize that given the way he sees the world and his, triggers, that maybe I could have been more sensitive to that. And yeah, I'll apologize for that. Or, I'm just trying to think how I would word it. I would say something like, yeah, okay, I do apologize that I just bulldozed or moved forward with that introduction. Looking back, I realized that was ill-advised because, that was a huge adjustment for you, and that's fine that it was. I want to tell you that he's not a threat, but it was not wise of me to dump that on you and expect you to just roll with it. I was hoping you would roll with it. There's no reason why you couldn't roll with it, but I get it. And I was pushing my agenda, and at the very least, I should have waited till after your birthday because you were really activated by that, which is totally understandable. And then the next day at your birthday, it kind of ruined it, at least for the two of us. Your behavior at the birthday party was not my fault, but it did lead to that, I suppose. So, I do apologize, and I am sorry. And sometimes I have a problem with asserting my agenda and not considering how it's going to affect people in general, not only you, but other people in my life. And so, yeah, I apologize for that. Something like that. Let's see how she does.
Una es pareja tuya. Eso es respeto. Tú nos respetas.
En mi vida, cuando tú dices, oh, mi amiga está aquí en tu país, yo dice, tengo una fiesta por mi cumpleaños, invita a ella. No tengo problema con eso.
Hey, deserving listeners, today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes in life, we are faced with tough choices, and the path forward isn't always clear. And some of you might even be facing a tough choice right now. Well, for me, I like to fully explore all the options. That usually helps me to feel more confident moving forward. And sometimes it really helps to talk with someone and get their perspective and maybe their wisdom. And of course, therapy can help with this. I never planned on specializing in this area when I started out as a therapist, but over time, a lot of clients have come to me when they are facing tough choices that they're having a hard time figuring out what to do. Well, one option worth exploring is BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's worth giving a try. It's entirely online, it's designed to be convenient and suited to your schedule, and also you can switch therapists at any time at no additional charge. So, let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk. Yeah. So, continued inability to empathize or understand. Now, he's not great at communicating it. So I don't completely fault her, but it's not hard to intuit what's going on for him. So, yeah. So she's saying, look, if you had a past partner that you invited, it wouldn't bother me. Okay, yeah. And that's not a viable argument. People use it all the time in discussions. It's not a viable argument. People are different. It doesn't, maybe it's something to bring up possibly, but it certainly doesn't make your point. It's sort of like my wife, for example, she has, I won't even say because she reviews these episodes, she has certain phobias. And I don't have those phobias. Some phobias we share, but she has some phobias that I don't have. And if I were to expose her to the stimulus of that phobia and cause her to freak out. And she doesn't just mildly freak out, like it's really very distressing to her. I didn't realize that in the beginning and made some mistakes, thinking that she was just kind of mildly afraid of these things. And I've since learned otherwise. And I understand phobias because I'm a clinician, but I also suffer from anxiety. So I understand how little people regard other people's anxieties. You'll get over it. You're just like, no, it's not something that you just get over. It's not mild. It's not just a preference in life. This is one of the worst experiences. My hands are sweating just thinking about the way other people just don't regard your anxiety. It's like no one listens, unless you have anxiety yourself, and then you go, oh, okay, I know I don't have that thing, but I know what that feels like. Anyway, so, and just to spread the word for y'all out there, if someone says they have a phobia or they're afraid of something, listen to it. Now, maybe they mean it as a small thing, but there's a possibility that they've been shamed into not emphasizing, or they don't know how to describe it. People's phobias and anxiety is real. You wouldn't know it, but anxiety is, I think, the most common mental disorder that people suffer from, including kids. Don't quote me on that, but from my memory, that is the statistic. More than any other category of disorders, depression, mood disorders, autism, other kinds of things, it's very, very common. I think something like a third of Americans will be diagnosable with an anxiety disorder at some point in their life. And a lot more people will also have pretty large traits, significant traits of an anxiety disorder, but they don't qualify for an actual anxiety disorder. Or they suffer from an anxiety disorder that doesn't really fit within the DSM criteria. Anyway, there are categories for that, not otherwise specified. Anyway, point is that it's very prevalent. And one of the things that, so my general push right now is raising awareness of that, and to not only listen and regard it when people bring it up. Someone's afraid of heights, or someone's afraid of this, someone's afraid, or there's foods that they're afraid of, or something like that. Not only that, but to intuit anxiety and significant anxiety in people when they don't necessarily even tell you, because often it is the case that's happening, or at least it's a motivation for you to investigate. Along these lines, when I worked more with kids in my early career, I found, upon assessing a lot of kids, that when kids presented their anxiety symptoms in schools, at home, this sort of thing, they didn't look like anxiety, because kids get fussy is the way that they react when they're freaking out about something, and or they have a temper tantrum, or they just start crying or something, and almost never would people interpret it as anxiety. If you see a kid suffering from something, you're just like, oh, that kid's, their grades are going down, or they have emotional troubles, or they are acting out or something. The first thing you should assess and hypothesize is anxiety, because it is the most likely thing. It depends on the presentation, of course, but often, ADHD would be diagnosed before anxiety, because certainly if you have an anxious kid, it can look like ADHD, and it's not, it's anxiety. And anxiety is way more common than ADHD. Just think about that. Think about how often do you hear ADHD being thrown around with kids, and how little you hear anxiety being discussed around kids. So I'd see that. I'd also see autism being applied, and sometimes that was warranted and sometimes not once I started to assess things. Or they're just a bad kid, or something else. There's just a lot of other things that people will go to, and they will exhaust their list of hypotheses that they will assess and never even consider anxiety. Because I think people believe that when people suffer from anxiety, that they will just say, I have anxiety. They will present and say, I'm suffering from anxiety right now. And adults don't do that, let alone kids. So when people are suffering from anxiety, and they have, and it depends on what we mean by anxiety, but I'm talking about panic, I'm talking about generalized, I'm talking about phobias, I'm talking about other kind of trauma reactivities that people have, triggers into stress, even PTSD is PTSD used to be in the anxiety chapter of the DSM. It's not anymore, which I get, but I do consider PTSD to be related. OCD used to be considered an anxiety disorder. It's now in its own chapter, and I get that as well, but I feel like they are very much related in my conceptual mind. So there's just a lot of things that people suffer from legitimately, but they don't know they suffer from it, so they don't say it. They don't use those words. What they will say is, I don't want to be in this situation, or get me away from this, or they'll identify as a rebellious person and they'll just say, well, I don't care about anything anymore. Social anxiety, another very prevalent thing. So why was I talking about that? Oh, so when I was saying that she's saying, if I were in that situation, I'd be fine. That's not a viable argument against what he is saying. And yeah, she doesn't even take the time to think, okay, is there anything there? She just immediate shut down. You're ridiculous. You're being immature is probably what she's thinking.
Mi problema es que tú respete la relación y no pongas a tus amigos primero que yo.
And he's not helping his case by wording it that way, because for Danielle, for anyone who is aware of feminism at all, is not going to appreciate this message. I don't even think this is what he means. I mean, maybe it is what he means, but I think more fundamentally it's because he feels rejected and hurt. And so he's not helping his situation by wording it this way, because she is absolutely going to have a problem with that. If I were a little birdie on her shoulder, and I would say, it depends, Danielle, on what you want. Do you want to salvage this relationship or not? Because if you want to, then you can't just, what would I do? I would say to him, okay, I don't really, we could debate as to what respecting your husband means exactly, but bottom line is you felt disrespected by me. You felt discounted by me, I'm guessing. Is that right? And maybe I do use a little bit of that. And so I'd get away from this, like, you're the woman, I'm the man paradigm, and just sort of direct the conversation to a different paradigm. And then I would say, in that respect, yes, I will agree with you that I was dismissive of your wants. And wrap that up. I want to get back to what you said earlier. I'm not on board with this idea that because you're the man and I'm the woman, that somehow you have this inherent power over me. That's just not how I think, just to let you know. I think we should both respect each other. And if you want to have the markers of the man in the family, that's fine. If you want to drive the car, or, well, she probably doesn't want that, but if you want to drive the car when you're sober, if you want me to take your last name, or, there's a conversation there that could be had that you might be able to bridge a gap, depending on how she feels about those kinds of things. But I'm not going to be submissive to you in our relationship or to other people. We're equals is the thing. So maybe that's something that I would say. And he might have a problem. It could be a deal breaker for him. I don't know. I don't think it is, though.
Primero que tu esposo.
El problema es muchas veces cuando peleando y tú piensas tú no tienes poder, tú haces cosas mucho malas.
Okay. Ironically, this is great that she's saying this, but she is missing the point. So she's saying, when you feel powerless, you say you do really disrespectful things. Yeah. Okay. So Danielle, what did you do to make him feel powerless? Now, I think what she would say is, I didn't do anything to make him feel powerless. Because he's a toxic man, it feels powerless just because I'm not submissive to him. I think that's what she would say. And I think that there is some data to support that, but that's not how I think things are going. I think he feels disrespected. I think he feels powerless because she bulldozes. They literally agreed prior to getting married that they were going to live in DR for a year and go to the States. And then she just unilaterally decided otherwise. Hence, he has no power on one of the most important things in his life, in his family's life. So yeah, he doesn't have power. He feels powerless. Then he does disrespectful things. It doesn't justify it, but the answer to your problems, Danielle, you just said it. Okay, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.